This is True Crime Stories for Sleep. Joaquín Archibaldo Guzmán Lora was born on April 4, 1957, in the small, remote village of La Tuna, in the municipality of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, Mexico. His family lived in poverty, a condition shared by many in the rugged mountainous region that offered little opportunity beyond agriculture and small-scale trade. His father, Jesus Guzmán, was a farmer, and his mother, Maria Consuelo Lora, worked alongside the family to maintain a fragile household. Growing up in this environment, young Joaquín became accustomed to hard labor, learning early to navigate the difficult terrain, survive scarcity, and understand the unwritten rules of a community where resources were limited and life was often unforgiving. Before we dive deeper into the story of how a boy from rural Sinaloa became one of the most notorious drug lords in history, make sure to subscribe, like this episode, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and which criminal figure you'd like to explore next. Your support helps this series grow and ensures you won't miss more true crime stories. From a young age, Guzmán showed a restless intelligence and a willingness to challenge authority. Accounts from his childhood suggest he was mischievous, resourceful, and fearless, often venturing into the nearby mountains with friends to explore or hunt, developing survival skills that would later prove essential in the dangerous world of drug trafficking. In school, his performance was unremarkable. Formal education was interrupted frequently by the demands of labor at home, yet he demonstrated an ability to negotiate, persuade, and manipulate situations in his favor, traits that would later define his leadership style. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the illegal drug trade in Mexico was still in its formative stages, primarily focused on marijuana and opium poppy cultivation. The rugged terrain of Sinaloa provided an ideal backdrop for clandestine operations, and small local networks thrived, often under the tacit protection of corrupt local officials. Young Joaquín began participating in these activities, initially assisting in the cultivation and transportation of marijuana. He quickly learned the operational details of production, distribution, and secrecy, observing the ways older traffickers evaded law enforcement and maximized profits. By the mid-1970s, Guzmán had begun to engage in more ambitious criminal activities. He joined forces with local traffickers in Sinaloa and nearby states, gradually moving from small-scale farming and smuggling operations into organized networks capable of transporting significant quantities of narcotics. Early mentorship under figures like Héctor Luis Palma Salazar provided him with both practical knowledge and strategic insight. It was during this period that Guzmán honed his understanding of logistics, risk management, and the importance of loyalty, traits that would later distinguish him from other rising traffickers. As his reputation grew within local circles, so did his ambition. By the late 1970s, the United States had become a rapidly expanding market for illicit drugs, and the potential profits were enormous. Guzmán recognized the opportunity and began orchestrating increasingly complex operations to move marijuana northward, experimenting with concealed shipments and establishing contacts with intermediaries in urban centers like Guadalajara and Mexico City. These formative experiences allowed him to develop networks that combined operational flexibility with the ruthless enforcement of rules, laying the groundwork for the future Sinaloa Cartel. During these years, Guzmán's personal life remained intertwined with his rising criminal career. He married early, fathering children while simultaneously expanding his networks. Sources indicate that he maintained a dual persona, a family man in public and a calculating operator behind the scenes. This duality would become a hallmark of his life, allowing him to cultivate loyalty, negotiate alliances, and operate undetected for long stretches of his career. By the early 1980s, Guzmán had begun forming strategic partnerships that would prove pivotal in his rise to power. He aligned himself with several powerful figures in the Mexican drug trade, learning the intricacies of smuggling routes that extended from Sinaloa to the United States. These partnerships were not merely transactional, they were also political. Guzmán quickly understood the importance of cultivating relationships with local authorities, law enforcement, and even federal officials, using bribes and social leverage to secure the safety of his operations. These alliances, often informal but highly effective, allowed him to expand his influence while minimizing risk. Simultaneously, Guzmán was observing changes in the international drug market. Colombian cartels, particularly the Medellín and Cali organizations, were beginning to dominate the cocaine trade in the Americas. While marijuana had been the primary export from Mexico, the emergence of cocaine presented a new and far more lucrative opportunity. By the mid-1980s, Guzmán had begun to diversify, facilitating the transport of small quantities of cocaine into the United States through increasingly sophisticated networks. Analysts later noted that this diversification was a critical turning point, signaling his ability to anticipate market shifts and position himself strategically for exponential growth. Guzmán's operational methods during this period reflected both ingenuity and audacity. He experimented with concealed compartments in vehicles, developed covert loading and unloading protocols, and created safe houses in remote locations. These techniques allowed him to evade detection and build a reputation for reliability and discretion among suppliers and buyers. His growing wealth enabled him to reward loyal operatives, incentivize efficiency, and solidify control over his expanding networks. By the late 1980s, the Guadalajara cartel, once the dominant force in Mexico, began to fracture following the arrest of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. This vacuum provided an opportunity for Guzmán to consolidate power. He and Ismael El Mayo Zambada began negotiating alliances with smaller trafficking networks across Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, effectively creating a coalition that would evolve into the Sinaloa Cartel. Strategic territory acquisition, the establishment of reliable smuggling routes, and a focus on loyalty and discipline became central to Guzmán's approach. Violence and intimidation were essential components of this strategy. While Guzmán did not initially employ public displays of brutality, he enforced strict discipline within his networks, ensuring compliance through a combination of financial incentives and targeted retribution. Sources from law enforcement and former cartel associates indicate that Guzmán's approach balanced fear and loyalty, cultivating a culture in which betrayal or incompetence carried immediate consequences. This disciplined framework allowed the organization to grow steadily while mitigating internal fragmentation. By the end of the 1980s, Guzmán had transformed from a regional trafficker into a figure capable of managing complex operations spanning multiple states and reaching into U.S. markets. His combination of strategic vision, operational flexibility, and ruthless enforcement had set the stage for his ascent to the leadership of the Sinaloa Cartel. Observers later noted that the lessons he learned during these early years, managing alliances, anticipating market trends, enforcing discipline, and balancing public perception, would define the methods by which he built one of the most powerful criminal organizations in modern history. The foundation laid during these formative decades would allow Guzmán to rise to unprecedented heights in the 1990s. From a boy growing up in a poor Sinaloa village to a trafficker capable of negotiating with international criminal organizations, these years shaped the skills, strategies, and mindset that would carry him through decades of success, danger, and eventual global notoriety. By the early 1980s, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had emerged as a rising figure in Mexico's growing drug trade. The foundations he had laid during his youth in Sinaloa, mastering survival, negotiation, and small-scale smuggling, had matured into a network capable of handling more complex operations. Marijuana remained the primary export, but Guzmán had begun recognizing the potential of cocaine, observing the growing influence of Colombian cartels and the rapidly expanding U.S. market. He was not content with being a regional trafficker. He sought to control production, transportation, and distribution on a scale that few in Mexico had attempted. During this period, Guzmán cultivated relationships with key figures in the Mexican underworld. He worked alongside Héctor Luis Palma Salazar and forged ties with other traffickers in Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Durango. These alliances were mutually beneficial, combining access to land, labor, and transport routes while providing protection against rivals and law enforcement. Analysts later noted that these relationships were not merely opportunistic. Guzmán had a keen understanding of the strategic value of trust and loyalty, often investing in personal connections that could endure over decades. Guzmán's operations in the early 1980s were increasingly sophisticated. He supervised the cultivation of marijuana in remote Sinaloa plantations, coordinating harvesting, packaging, and transportation to urban distribution centers. Convoys and clandestine vehicles became standard, and he experimented with hidden compartments, false bottoms, and secret routes. The organization operated with a combination of secrecy and discipline, balancing risk with the need to maintain steady supply to U.S. markets. These early logistics innovations laid the groundwork for the more complex operations that would define the Sinaloa Cartel in the following decades. It was during these years that Guzmán first encountered the influence of the Colombian cocaine trade. Colombia had become the primary source of cocaine for U.S. markets, with cartels like Medellin and Cali dominating the business. Mexican traffickers initially served as intermediaries, moving small quantities of cocaine northward. Guzmán recognized both the opportunity and the necessity of establishing direct access. He began negotiating with Colombian contacts, offering secure routes into the United States while ensuring that payments, security, and secrecy were strictly managed. Early shipments were modest in volume, but they provided invaluable experience in handling a product far more lucrative than marijuana. The Guadalajara cartel, led by Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, was the dominant organization in Mexico at the time. Guzmán operated within this system, supplying marijuana and eventually facilitating cocaine shipments for Félix Gallardo's network. This association allowed him to gain practical experience in large-scale operations, understand the politics of cartel leadership, and observe how alliances, rivalries, and law enforcement pressures shaped the business. He also learned the importance of discretion and the careful management of relationships, both with associates and corrupt officials. By the mid-1980s, Guzmán had begun expanding his influence beyond Sinaloa. He coordinated operations in neighboring states, often mediating disputes between local traffickers to prevent conflicts that could disrupt business. Reports from law enforcement at the time indicate that he developed a reputation for strategic thinking, earning respect not only through force but through negotiation and planning. He combined operational discipline with a deep understanding of the social and economic landscape, ensuring that his operations could survive fluctuations in law enforcement activity or rival aggression. Diversification became a key element of Guzmán's strategy. While marijuana remained central, he began increasing his involvement in cocaine trafficking, arranging for shipments from Colombia into Mexico and onward to the United States. This shift required not only logistical skill but also financial management. He began building networks for laundering money, using businesses, real estate, and other channels to obscure profits. Analysts later highlighted that these early experiments in financial operations were critical in establishing the resilience of his organization, allowing it to absorb losses, expand operations, and maintain loyalty among operatives. Violence was not the hallmark of Guzmán's operations yet, but enforcement and discipline were essential. Internal control within his networks was maintained through strict codes, loyalty tests, and occasional intimidation. These measures ensured operational integrity and minimized the risk of betrayal, which could be catastrophic in the emerging cocaine trade. He also began observing the enforcement styles of Colombian traffickers, noting the balance between fear and respect that allowed leaders to maintain authority without destabilizing their operations. The late 1980s were a pivotal period. The arrest of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo in 1989 marked the beginning of a power vacuum in Mexico's drug trade. The Guadalajara cartel, once dominant, fractured into smaller, competing factions. Guzmán, along with Ismael, El Mayo, Zambada, Hector Palma, and a few other trusted associates, began consolidating control over operations in Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua. These territories were strategically important, offering access to smuggling routes into the United States and the production of marijuana and cocaine. Guzmán's approach combined alliances, careful negotiation, and the selective use of force, creating a coalition that would eventually form the core of the Sinaloa Cartel. During this period, Guzmán also began developing a more formalized organizational structure. He implemented a system of regional operatives who could manage day-to-day operations independently while remaining accountable to central leadership. Communications were carefully managed, and sensitive information was compartmentalized to prevent leaks. Analysts have noted that this approach was a precursor to the highly decentralized structure of the Sinaloa Cartel, which would allow it to survive the arrests and deaths of key figures in later years. Operational security became a priority. Guzmán instructed associates to avoid patterns, rotate routes, and maintain secrecy about shipment details. Safe houses, remote storage locations, and multiple transit methods were employed to reduce risk. Early coordination with Colombian suppliers also required trust, verification, and contingency planning, as any misstep could result in financial loss or violent retaliation. These protocols reflected Guzmán's growing sophistication and his understanding that scale in trafficking required more than brute force. It demanded meticulous planning and foresight. By the end of the 1980s, Guzmán had firmly established himself as a rising power in Mexico's drug trade. He controlled significant portions of the marijuana and emerging cocaine market, maintained alliances across multiple states, and had begun building the organizational and operational framework that would define the Sinaloa Cartel. His reputation was growing not only among traffickers but also among law enforcement and media, who began to recognize him as a key figure in the increasingly lucrative and violent drug trade. The stage was set for the next phase of Guzmán's life. The 1990s would bring the formal consolidation of the Sinaloa Cartel, direct involvement in the cocaine trade with Colombia, and confrontations with rival cartels that would define Mexico's criminal landscape for decades. The strategic vision, operational discipline, and loyalty networks developed during the 1980s would allow Guzmán to survive and thrive in a dangerous and rapidly changing environment. From a young man assisting in small-scale smuggling to a regional powerhouse controlling sophisticated trafficking networks, these years shaped the man who would become known globally as El Chapo. By 1989, the Mexican drug landscape was undergoing a profound transformation. The arrest of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, leader of the Guadalajara cartel, left a power vacuum that would reshape the country's criminal hierarchy. Félix Gallardo's empire, once centralized and tightly controlled, fractured into regional factions, each led by ambitious traffickers who sought to secure territories and maintain profitable routes into the United States. Joaquín, El Chapo, Guzmán, and Ismael, El Mayo, Zambada quickly recognized the opportunity, consolidating influence in Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, regions crucial for trafficking marijuana and increasingly lucrative cocaine shipments. Guzmán's rise was not simply a matter of brute force. It reflected years of strategic planning and operational foresight. He and Zambada began formalizing their alliance, combining networks of trusted operatives, safe houses, and transport routes into a coordinated operation that could rival any existing organization. The partnership balanced complementary skills. Zambada provided experience and established contacts, while Guzmán offered audacity, innovation, and the ability to execute complex logistical plans. This collaboration laid the foundation for what would become the Sinaloa Cartel. During these formative years, Guzmán demonstrated a unique capacity for logistics and innovation. He expanded smuggling operations beyond marijuana into cocaine, working directly with Colombian suppliers who controlled production and initial distribution. Cocaine presented new challenges: higher value cargo, stricter enforcement risks, and the need for sophisticated financial management. Guzmán's teams developed clandestine tunnels, hidden compartments in trucks and vehicles, and maritime routes that circumvented traditional checkpoints. These innovations allowed them to move larger volumes with minimal detection, increasing profitability and establishing their reputation for reliability among international partners. The early 1990s also marked Guzmán's increasing involvement in regional politics and law enforcement manipulation. Corruption was endemic in many Mexican states, and traffickers like Guzmán took advantage of weak institutions to protect their operations. Bribes, payoffs, and strategic intimidation allowed him to operate with minimal interference, while careful cultivation of local loyalty ensured that community members were often willing to shield the cartel's activities. Analysts later observed that this combination of social leverage and calculated corruption was a hallmark of Guzmán's leadership style, enabling him to maintain control without relying solely on violence. Rivalries intensified during this period as the Guadalajara cartel's collapse left several ambitious traffickers competing for territory. The Tijuana cartel, led by the Arellano Felix brothers, sought to expand northward, while the Juarez cartel under Amado Carrillo Fuentes moved to assert dominance along key routes. Guzmán responded strategically, avoiding unnecessary conflicts while carefully negotiating temporary alliances and neutralizing potential threats. Violence was used selectively, targeting rivals or traitors when necessary, but he avoided large-scale wars that could attract unwanted government attention. This calculated approach allowed him to consolidate power while minimizing disruption to operations. By 1990, Guzmán had begun to attract international attention. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, had identified him as a rising figure in cross-border trafficking, noting his increasing role in cocaine shipments from Colombia to the United States. Early intelligence indicated that Guzmán and Zambada were coordinating multiple distribution channels simultaneously, employing innovative concealment techniques, and maintaining a decentralized but highly controlled network of operatives. Analysts emphasize that this period demonstrated the combination of audacity, organization, and operational discipline that would define Guzmán's later dominance. Financial sophistication became increasingly important as the volume and value of shipments grew. Guzmán and his associates established laundering operations through legitimate businesses, real estate, and offshore accounts, ensuring that profits could be reinvested without drawing scrutiny. These financial strategies allowed the cartel to sustain operations, reward loyalty, and expand infrastructure while maintaining plausible deniability. It also created a system in which operatives had personal incentives to maintain secrecy and operational efficiency, further strengthening Guzmán's control. One of the most critical developments of this era was the formalization of the Sinaloa Cartel's organizational structure. Guzmán implemented a semi-decentralized model, assigning regional managers control over local operations while ensuring strategic alignment with the central leadership. Communication channels were carefully managed, and sensitive information was compartmentalized to prevent leaks. Analysts later noted that this organizational design allowed the cartel to survive arrests, betrayals, and rival attacks, creating resilience that would prove crucial in the decades to come. Guzmán's leadership style also began to merge intimidation with selective acts of social influence. While violent reprisals were employed to enforce loyalty and deter competitors, Guzmán maintained an image among local populations as a figure who provided opportunity and security in otherwise impoverished areas. Though far from a benevolent presence, these tactics reinforced loyalty among residents, discouraged cooperation with authorities, and protected trafficking corridors. Such methods reflected a sophisticated understanding of both human psychology and strategic advantage, a combination that distinguished Guzmán from many of his contemporaries. As the early 1990s progressed, cocaine operations expanded rapidly. Guzmán established direct coordination with Colombian cartels, often negotiating terms, prices, and shipment methods to maximize profits while minimizing risk. Safe houses, warehouses, and distribution points proliferated, and the operational network extended to the United States, with reliable contacts ensuring timely delivery. Analysts later described this system as highly professionalized, resembling corporate logistics rather than traditional criminal smuggling, highlighting Guzmán's skill in turning illicit activity into an efficient enterprise. Internal cohesion within the Sinaloa cartel was a top priority. Regional commanders were granted autonomy, but loyalty was enforced through strict codes, financial incentives, and, when necessary, intimidation. Guzmán understood that fragmentation or betrayal could be disastrous, and he implemented checks to maintain accountability. Operatives were monitored, information was compartmentalized, and contingency plans were developed for potential arrests or rival attacks. This disciplined internal culture allowed the cartel to scale its operations while minimizing operational risk. By 1993, Guzmán had firmly established himself as the dominant figure in Sinaloa, with influence stretching into multiple states and control over a growing portion of cocaine smuggling into the United States. His reputation for operational efficiency, strategic thinking, and selective use of force positioned him as a rising power in Mexico's criminal landscape. The formal consolidation of the Sinaloa Cartel under his leadership marked a critical turning point, setting the stage for the exponential growth and international notoriety that would follow in the 1990s and early 2000s. The foundation laid during these years enabled Guzmán to survive future arrests, rival conflicts, and shifting market dynamics. By combining strategic foresight, operational innovation, disciplined enforcement, and carefully cultivated alliances, he created an organization capable of resilience and expansion. His experience navigating the collapse of the Guadalajara cartel, the rise of competitors, and the growing cocaine trade taught him lessons in logistics, loyalty, and strategic patience, lessons that would define his approach to leadership for decades. By the end of 1993, the Sinaloa Cartel was no longer a regional operation. It had become a formidable force capable of challenging other major cartels and controlling critical trafficking routes. Guzmán's vision, operational expertise, and ability to combine diplomacy, intimidation, and innovation had propelled him from a rising regional trafficker to a figure with the infrastructure, alliances, and strategy to dominate Mexico's drug trade in the coming years. The period from 1989 to 1993 set the stage for his rise to national and international prominence, laying the structural and strategic foundations that would support the cartel's operations for decades. By 1993, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had firmly established himself as a dominant figure in Mexico's drug trade. The Sinaloa Cartel, which he had helped form after the collapse of the Guadalajara cartel, controlled vast territories in Sinaloa, Durango, Chihuahua, and other northern states. Guzmán's operations had expanded well beyond marijuana, with cocaine smuggling now accounting for the bulk of profits. This period marked his transformation from a regional trafficker into a figure whose influence and reach were international, as the cartel began shipping increasing volumes of cocaine into the United States and beyond. The early 1990s also marked a turning point in Guzmán's relationship with law enforcement. Mexican authorities were under increasing pressure from U.S. counterparts, particularly the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, to curb cocaine trafficking. In 1993, the government launched a series of operations targeting the Sinaloa Cartel and its associates, culminating in Guzmán's first major capture. He was arrested in Guatemala and extradited to Mexico, where he was held in the maximum security prison of Puente Grande in Jalisco. The capture made international headlines, signaling the growing profile of Guzmán as a criminal mastermind, even as it temporarily interrupted his operations. Despite incarceration, Guzmán's influence within the cartel remained intact. He had already established a decentralized network of operatives who could manage day-to-day operations independently. Trusted lieutenants oversaw production, transportation, and distribution, ensuring that profits continued to flow. Communications were carefully managed, with encrypted messages, coded instructions, and trusted intermediaries maintaining control over shipments. This organizational resilience demonstrated that Guzmán's leadership style was more than personal charisma. It was a carefully structured system capable of enduring significant disruptions. The conditions at Puente Grande were not conducive to permanent containment. The prison, despite its designation as maximum security, was plagued by corruption and insufficient oversight. Guards and officials were susceptible to bribery, and Guzmán leveraged his wealth and influence to create opportunities for escape. In January 2001, he successfully fled, reportedly hiding in a laundry cart, demonstrating not only audacity but meticulous planning. His escape was emblematic of his career, bold, calculated, and executed with precision. This event also reinforced his image as untouchable, both among cartel associates and law enforcement, cementing his reputation as El Chapo, the short one who could elude capture. After the escape, Guzmán intensified his operations, expanding the Sinaloa cartel's influence into new territories and increasing the scale of cocaine shipments. By the mid-1990s, the cartel had established a network of tunnels, hidden airstrips, and maritime routes facilitating movement across borders. Analysts noted that these operations were not chaotic. They reflected a level of logistical sophistication comparable to corporate supply chains. Shipment schedules were optimized, distribution points were strategically placed, and contingency plans were in place to respond to law enforcement actions. Guzmán's ability to maintain operational efficiency while evading capture became a defining characteristic of his leadership. During this period, Guzmán also faced increasing competition from rival cartels. The Tijuana Cartel, led by the Arellano Felix brothers, and the Juarez Cartel, under Amado Carrillo Fuentes, sought to assert control over lucrative trafficking routes. Conflicts occasionally erupted into violent confrontations, including targeted assassinations and coordinated attacks on rival shipments. Guzmán's strategy, however, emphasized selective engagement. Rather than provoking full-scale wars that could attract government scrutiny, he employed calculated strikes and negotiated temporary alliances when necessary. This approach allowed the Sinaloa Cartel to expand its territory while minimizing losses and maintaining stability within its own network. Financial operations became increasingly sophisticated during the late 1990s. Guzmán invested in real estate, cash-intensive businesses, and offshore accounts to launder profits. The cartel also developed methods for moving large sums of money across borders, often using couriers, shell companies, and international banking networks. These financial strategies not only secured the cartel's revenue but also reinforced loyalty among operatives, who benefited directly from the organization's wealth. By this time, Guzmán had demonstrated an unparalleled ability to combine criminal operations with financial acumen, ensuring the sustainability of his empire. The period also saw Guzmán expand into strategic partnerships with international suppliers and distributors. Colombian cartels, recognizing his organizational capacity and reliability, increasingly trusted him with larger shipments of cocaine. This direct collaboration allowed the Sinaloa Cartel to bypass intermediaries, increasing both profit margins and operational control. Guzmán's reputation for discretion, efficiency, and enforcement of agreements made him a preferred partner in the international drug trade, further consolidating his influence. As his operations grew, so did his notoriety. By the late 1990s, Guzmán had become a household name within criminal and law enforcement circles. His ability to evade capture, orchestrate complex smuggling operations, and maintain loyalty among his network contributed to a mythos that extended beyond Mexico. Media coverage highlighted both his audacity and the reach of his cartel, while U.S. authorities intensified efforts to dismantle the Sinaloa network. Guzmán's dual reputation, respected by associates, feared by rivals, and pursued by law enforcement, underscored the complexity of his rise. During this period, Guzmán also focused on maintaining internal cohesion within the cartel. He implemented strict operational codes, monitored regional commanders, and conducted regular evaluations of personnel. Loyalty was rewarded with financial incentives and operational authority, while betrayal or incompetence was met with immediate consequences. Analysts later emphasized that this disciplined approach prevented internal fragmentation, allowing the cartel to function effectively despite arrests, raids, or shifts in leadership. The late 1990s also marked a period of technological adaptation. Guzmán began incorporating surveillance techniques, encrypted communications, and advanced transportation methods to evade detection. Safe houses were equipped with security measures, and supply routes were periodically rotated to avoid patterns. These adaptations demonstrated his commitment to operational security and reflected lessons learned from both past successes and law enforcement efforts to disrupt his activities. By 1999, Guzmán had effectively transformed the Sinaloa Cartel into a resilient, multi-state operation with significant influence over Mexico's drug trade. He had established reliable networks for cocaine trafficking, maintained strategic alliances, and implemented organizational systems that allowed the cartel to endure disruptions. Violence remained a tool, but Guzmán exercised discretion, targeting threats selectively and avoiding large-scale conflicts that could undermine profitability. His ability to balance expansion, operational security, and internal cohesion set the stage for the next phase of his career, becoming one of the most powerful and elusive figures in global organized crime. The lessons of this era were foundational. Guzmán's experiences, first major capture, escape, expansion, and consolidation, shaped his approach to leadership, logistics, and strategic risk management. By combining audacity, planning, financial expertise, and disciplined enforcement, he created an empire capable of sustained growth. The period from 1993 to 1999 was not only a time of territorial consolidation and operational expansion but also a crucible in which the methods, structures, and reputation that would define Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán were forged. By the late 1990s, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had solidified his position as a major figure in Mexico's drug trade, but his rising prominence drew increasing attention from authorities. Law enforcement in both Mexico and the United States intensified their efforts to capture him. Guzmán was forced to operate increasingly as a fugitive, constantly moving between safe houses and remote locations to avoid detection. These years would test his operational skill, strategic foresight, and the resilience of the network he had built. Guzmán's ability to remain elusive was a product of meticulous planning and his deep understanding of the operational landscape. He employed a decentralized network of operatives capable of managing production, transport, and distribution independently. This system allowed him to remain in hiding while the Sinaloa Cartel continued to function efficiently. Safe houses were strategically placed across northern Mexico, and transportation routes were rotated frequently to prevent patterns that authorities could exploit. Analysts later highlighted that this period demonstrated Guzmán's aptitude for balancing operational security with ongoing business expansion, a combination that would become a hallmark of his leadership. During his fugitive years, Guzmán also strengthened his alliances and expanded his influence in Colombia. Direct coordination with Colombian producers allowed him to secure larger cocaine shipments, reducing reliance on intermediaries and increasing profitability. His growing reputation for reliability and discretion among Colombian partners further solidified the Sinaloa Cartel's international reach. These partnerships also allowed him to diversify trafficking methods, including maritime routes, air transport, and clandestine border crossings, all designed to reduce risk while maximizing efficiency. By the turn of the millennium, Guzmán's operations had become highly sophisticated. The cartel controlled key territories in Sinaloa, Durango, Chihuahua, and parts of Baja California, with influence extending into central Mexico. These territories provided not only production areas for marijuana and cocaine but also secure transit corridors for smuggling into the United States. Reports from the DEA and Mexican authorities during this period indicated that the Sinaloa Cartel's shipments were increasing in volume and regularity, demonstrating the operational competence Guzmán had instilled in his organization. Guzmán's first major capture occurred in 1993, but it was during his fugitive years that his notoriety truly skyrocketed. His ability to evade authorities became legendary, and he was increasingly viewed as untouchable. Corruption played a significant role in his continued freedom. Guzmán cultivated relationships with law enforcement officials, judges, and politicians, providing financial incentives to secure loyalty or silence. This strategy not only protected him personally but also insulated his operations from interference, demonstrating his understanding of the importance of systemic influence in maintaining power. In addition to corruption, Guzmán relied on sophisticated intelligence networks. Trusted informants provided information about potential raids, law enforcement movements, and rival activities. This intelligence allowed him to make rapid decisions, relocate operations, and avoid capture. Analysts later emphasized that this ability to gather and act on information was critical to his success, allowing him to maintain control over a sprawling criminal enterprise while remaining effectively invisible to authorities. During these years, the Sinaloa Cartel continued to expand its footprint in the United States. Guzmán established partnerships with distributors in cities like Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, ensuring a steady flow of cocaine to the American market. Shipments were carefully coordinated, often involving multiple stages of transport, including maritime, overland, and air routes. The scale of these operations reflected a level of logistical sophistication rarely seen in organized crime at the time, and it underscored Guzmán's ability to manage complex networks from a position of relative isolation. The late 1990s also brought increasing competition from rival cartels, including the Tijuana and Juarez factions. Guzmán's strategy emphasized selective engagement, targeted assassinations, intimidation of key figures, and strategic alliances minimized the risk of open conflict while allowing the Sinaloa Cartel to expand its territories. Analysts note that this approach minimized disruption to operations and maintained the cartel's profitability, reflecting a level of strategic thinking that distinguished Guzmán from other traffickers who relied primarily on brute force. Financial management became a central focus during this period. Guzmán and his lieutenants developed sophisticated laundering networks, utilizing businesses, real estate, and offshore accounts to obscure the flow of illicit funds. Money was reinvested into production, transportation, and bribery, ensuring the cartel's long-term stability. By establishing a robust financial infrastructure, Guzmán was able to reward loyalty, maintain operational integrity, and secure influence over both his operatives and external stakeholders, including officials and international partners. Despite operating as a fugitive, Guzmán also paid attention to the internal cohesion of the Sinaloa Cartel. Regional managers were given autonomy, but communication remained tightly controlled, and loyalty was constantly reinforced through financial incentives and disciplinary measures. These structures allowed the cartel to function effectively even in the absence of direct oversight, ensuring that Guzmán's strategic vision was executed across multiple territories simultaneously. One of the defining aspects of this period was Guzmán's ability to integrate operational security, intelligence, and logistics. Safe houses were equipped with surveillance, secure communication channels were employed, and shipment routes were regularly altered. Contingency plans accounted for law enforcement activity, rival actions, and potential internal betrayals. Analysts highlight that this combination of foresight and adaptability allowed Guzmán to maintain operations at a high level of efficiency despite significant external pressures. Guzmán's influence extended beyond operations into social and political spheres. While he was far from a public figure in the way some traffickers attempted to be, his ability to manipulate local communities and officials ensured that his operations could function with minimal resistance. Local populations in key territories often relied on cartel-sponsored employment or security, and officials could be incentivized or intimidated into compliance. This dual approach of influence and intimidation reinforced his control and minimized interference in cartel activities. By 2001, the culmination of Guzmán's fugitive years demonstrated his ability to thrive under extreme pressure. He had expanded the Sinaloa Cartel's operations, established international partnerships, and solidified a decentralized yet disciplined organizational structure. This period not only reinforced his reputation as one of the most elusive criminals in history but also positioned the cartel for unprecedented expansion in the early 2000s. Guzmán's operational style, combining strategic planning, logistical sophistication, intelligence gathering, and selective violence, had become the blueprint for sustained cartel dominance. The lessons from this era were pivotal. Guzmán's experiences in evading capture, managing large-scale smuggling operations, and maintaining loyalty among operatives shaped the methods he would use throughout his criminal career. By balancing expansion with operational security and strategic use of force, he created an organization capable of surviving law enforcement actions, rival conflicts, and shifts in the international drug trade. The period from 1999 to 2001 cemented Guzmán's status not just as a powerful trafficker but as a master strategist in global organized crime. After his escape from Puente Grande in January 2001, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán reemerged as one of Mexico's most powerful and elusive traffickers. His ability to evade law enforcement, while maintaining operational control, marked a turning point in the Sinaloa Cartel's evolution. With rivals distracted and authorities scrambling to respond, Guzmán focused on consolidating power, expanding cocaine distribution networks, and modernizing the cartel's infrastructure. These years were critical in establishing the foundation for the unprecedented expansion that would define his dominance in the early 2000s. Guzmán's escape itself was a calculated operation that demonstrated his logistical acumen and ability to exploit systemic weaknesses. He reportedly used a laundry cart to slip past guards, taking advantage of corrupt officials and lax security protocols. The event underscored the role of bribery and influence in his operations, a tactic he would continue to use extensively. Beyond the immediate escape, Guzmán had already prepared contingency plans, including safe houses, trusted couriers, and alternative routes to move freely while avoiding capture. This meticulous planning allowed him to re-establish control quickly and resume operations without significant disruption. The post-escape period saw Guzmán intensify the cartel's activities along the U.S.-Mexico corridor. The Sinaloa Cartel expanded its presence in states like Baja California, Sonora, Chihuahua, and Durango, securing critical routes for smuggling cocaine, marijuana, and other drugs. The focus on northern corridors was strategic, as these routes offered direct access to key U.S. markets, including Los Angeles, Houston, and Chicago. Analysts observed that by controlling these regions, Guzmán not only increased the volume of trafficking but also established leverage over rival cartels seeking similar access. Cocaine shipments increased substantially during this period, facilitated by closer coordination with Colombian producers. Guzmán's network implemented advanced smuggling techniques, including semi-submersible vessels, hidden compartments in vehicles, and clandestine airstrips. The use of technology and creative concealment allowed the cartel to evade detection and move larger quantities efficiently. U.S. law enforcement reported that Sinaloa's operations had grown increasingly professionalized, with organized logistics, sophisticated tracking, and disciplined enforcement. Guzmán's approach resembled corporate management more than traditional criminal enterprise, combining efficiency, risk mitigation, and strategic planning. Despite operating in the shadows, Guzmán maintained strong control over his organization. Regional lieutenants were empowered to make decisions, but loyalty and performance were closely monitored. Rewards, promotions, and financial incentives were used to maintain cohesion, while disloyalty or incompetence was met with swift consequences. This internal discipline was critical in preventing fragmentation, particularly as the cartel expanded geographically and faced increased competition. Analysts have consistently highlighted that the Sinaloa cartel's resilience during Guzmán's fugitive years was largely attributable to this structured and disciplined approach. Violence continued to be a tool, but Guzmán's strategy remained selective and calculated. Targeted assassinations were employed to neutralize threats, intimidate rivals, or enforce discipline within the organization. Open conflicts were generally avoided unless strategically necessary, as prolonged wars could attract law enforcement attention or disrupt operations. This careful balance of force and restraint enabled Guzmán to expand influence while minimizing exposure, reinforcing the cartel's reputation as both ruthless and highly efficient. Financial sophistication became increasingly central to the cartel's operations. Guzmán invested heavily in legitimate businesses, real estate, and offshore accounts to launder the proceeds of trafficking. These investments served multiple purposes: generating additional revenue, consolidating influence in key regions, and obscuring the flow of illicit funds from authorities. Couriers, shell companies, and international banking networks facilitated the movement of money across borders. This financial infrastructure not only secured the cartel's wealth but also reinforced loyalty among operatives, who benefited directly from the organization's expansion. During these years, Guzmán also strengthened the Sinaloa cartel's alliances and partnerships with other criminal organizations. Colombian producers increasingly relied on him to manage cocaine shipments into the United States, trusting his operational expertise and organizational reliability. Within Mexico, temporary alliances with smaller cartels and independent traffickers helped maintain stability and secure critical transit routes. These alliances were carefully negotiated, with Guzmán leveraging his reputation, financial resources, and capacity for selective violence to ensure compliance and cooperation. The period also witnessed an escalation in intelligence gathering and operational security. Guzmán invested in surveillance, encrypted communications, and counterintelligence measures to prevent law enforcement infiltration. Trusted operatives monitored movements of authorities, rival cartels, and potential threats, allowing Guzmán to make informed, timely decisions. Analysts later noted that this focus on intelligence and adaptive operational planning became a defining feature of his leadership, enabling the Sinaloa Cartel to sustain operations despite increasing pressure from Mexican and U.S. law enforcement agencies. By 2003, Guzmán's control over trafficking corridors and cocaine distribution networks was nearly absolute. He had established a reputation for efficiency, secrecy, and strategic brilliance that extended beyond Mexico's borders. U.S. authorities recognized him as a key figure in global drug trafficking, and his name began appearing regularly in intelligence reports, indictments, and international media coverage. Despite the attention, Guzmán's ability to maintain operational security allowed him to remain effectively untouchable, reinforcing the mythos surrounding his persona. The cartel's internal structure continued to evolve. Guzmán implemented a semi-decentralized model, delegating operational authority to regional managers while retaining strategic oversight. This structure allowed the Sinaloa Cartel to expand rapidly without overextending Guzmán's personal capacity. Regional managers were responsible for specific territories, shipments, and enforcement, while strategic decisions, alliances, major trafficking routes, and financial management remained centralized. This balance between autonomy and control was critical to the cartel's resilience and growth. In addition to operational expansion, Guzmán focused on consolidating influence over law enforcement and political structures. Bribery, intimidation, and strategic manipulation allowed him to secure compliance from key officials, creating an environment where law enforcement interference was minimized. Analysts later highlighted that this combination of influence, operational discipline, and strategic violence enabled Guzmán to expand the cartel's reach while maintaining a degree of operational predictability rare in organized crime networks. By 2006, Guzmán had solidified his position as one of the most powerful drug traffickers in the world. The Sinaloa Cartel controlled key production areas, trafficking routes, and distribution networks spanning Mexico and the United States. Guzmán's methods, strategic planning, operational security, financial acumen, selective violence, and intelligence gathering had transformed the organization into a highly resilient and sophisticated criminal enterprise. These years established the foundation for the cartel's dominance in the subsequent decade and underscored Guzmán's status as a master strategist in global organized crime. The period from 2001 to 2006 illustrates the combination of audacity, operational intelligence, and organizational discipline that defined Guzmán's career. His ability to escape capture, expand networks, maintain loyalty, and manage complex trafficking operations set him apart from contemporaries and positioned the Sinaloa Cartel for long-term success. By the mid-2000s, Guzmán had not only regained his power after Puente Grande but had elevated his organization to unprecedented levels of efficiency, profitability, and influence, setting the stage for the next phase of his life, becoming an international criminal icon, pursued relentlessly yet always elusive. By 2006, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had fully re-established himself as the undisputed leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, which had become Mexico's most powerful criminal organization. The cartel's operations spanned multiple states, with entrenched networks controlling cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and methamphetamine trafficking. Guzmán's ability to evade capture, coordinate complex smuggling operations, and manage rivalries had made him a target not only for Mexican authorities but also for U.S. agencies increasingly aware of the cartel's reach. This period marked a new era of both operational expansion and intensified law enforcement pursuit. The Mexican government, pressured by the U.S. and facing growing domestic violence, launched a series of operations aimed at dismantling the Sinaloa Cartel. Despite these efforts, Guzmán's decentralized organizational model and his robust intelligence network enabled him to anticipate and evade many raids. Safe houses, remote hideouts, and trusted lieutenants ensured the continuity of operations even during law enforcement offensives. Analysts later emphasized that Guzmán's ability to adapt quickly and maintain command in the face of government pressure distinguished him from other traffickers, allowing the Sinaloa Cartel to expand even as rivals faced arrests and territorial losses. During this period, violence in Mexico escalated dramatically. The capture or weakening of competing organizations, such as the Juarez and Tijuana cartels, often triggered territorial battles. Guzmán employed a strategic mix of negotiation, selective violence, and intimidation to secure control over key trafficking corridors. Targeted assassinations of rival leaders or potential defectors reinforced loyalty within the cartel while deterring opposition. Unlike other cartels that relied on indiscriminate violence, Guzmán's measured approach maintained operational efficiency and minimized unnecessary exposure to law enforcement. The cartel's expansion into the United States became increasingly sophisticated. Guzmán established partnerships with distributors in major cities including Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, and New York. Smuggling operations incorporated tunnels, hidden compartments in vehicles, maritime transport, and increasingly semi-submersible vessels. These innovations reflected both an understanding of law enforcement patterns and a commitment to maintaining high-volume, low-risk trafficking. The Sinaloa Cartel's logistical and operational sophistication during these years set new standards for organized crime globally. Financial operations grew alongside operational expansion. Guzmán continued to invest in legitimate businesses, real estate, and offshore accounts to launder illicit proceeds. The cartel also developed elaborate money-moving schemes using couriers, shell companies, and international banking networks. By maintaining strict oversight of finances and rewarding loyal operatives, Guzmán reinforced internal cohesion while ensuring the sustainability of the cartel. Analysts noted that this financial acumen, combined with operational discipline, enabled the Sinaloa Cartel to withstand law enforcement pressure and maintain dominance over its territories. By the late 2000s, Guzmán's notoriety had reached international levels. Media outlets around the world reported on his audacious escapes, the size and wealth of the Sinaloa Cartel, and his status as one of the most wanted criminals globally. His ability to evade capture became part of his public persona, earning him both fear and a peculiar form of admiration in some local communities. The El Chapo legend was not only a product of his criminal activities but also of his media presence, intentional or otherwise, which amplified his mystique and reinforced his influence. During these years, Guzmán faced significant operational challenges. Rival cartels occasionally attempted to reclaim territories, and internal disputes within the Sinaloa network threatened cohesion. To manage these risks, Guzmán implemented strict codes of conduct, monitored regional commanders, and conducted periodic reviews of operational performance. Loyalty was enforced through financial incentives and the threat of immediate retribution for betrayal. Analysts highlight that this combination of incentives and discipline was central to the cartel's resilience and longevity. Guzmán's first major arrest in this period came in February 2014. After years of pursuit, Mexican Marines captured him at a condominium in Mazatlan, Sinaloa. The operation was a culmination of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and coordination between Mexican and U.S. authorities. Guzmán's capture marked a significant milestone for law enforcement, signaling a temporary disruption to Sinaloa operations. However, the cartel's decentralized structure and Guzmán's network of lieutenants ensured continuity despite the arrest, reflecting the operational resilience he had cultivated over decades. The arrest did not immediately end Guzmán's influence. While in prison, he continued to exert control over the cartel through trusted intermediaries. Communications were carefully managed, with encrypted messages, intermediaries, and coded instructions allowing him to maintain operational command. Analysts later noted that this period demonstrated Guzmán's ability to adapt even when physically constrained, ensuring that the cartel's operations remained largely unaffected by his incarceration. Despite the disruption, Guzmán's personal legend only grew. Media coverage highlighted his audacity, including prior escapes and the sheer scale of the Sinaloa Cartel. His notoriety underscored the challenges authorities faced in dismantling a criminal network that combined operational sophistication, financial acumen, and deep-rooted influence over both local communities and corruptible officials. Public fascination with El Chapo reinforced his reputation, even as law enforcement intensified efforts to contain the cartel's reach. During this period, the Sinaloa Cartel continued to innovate. Guzmán's lieutenants refined smuggling methods, developed new trafficking routes, and strengthened international partnerships. The cartel increasingly relied on technology for coordination, intelligence gathering, and operational security. Semi-submersibles, tunnels, and complex courier networks allowed shipments to bypass traditional checkpoints, demonstrating a level of logistical sophistication rarely seen in organized crime. This combination of innovation and operational discipline allowed the Sinaloa Cartel to thrive despite heightened scrutiny from Mexican and U.S. authorities. By the end of 2014, Guzmán's capture marked both a personal defeat and a strategic challenge for the Sinaloa Cartel. While his incarceration temporarily disrupted leadership, the cartel's decentralized structure allowed it to continue operating effectively. The period from 2006 to 2014 illustrates the culmination of Guzmán's decades-long strategy, a combination of strategic planning, operational security, selective violence, financial sophistication, and intelligence management that allowed him to dominate the Mexican drug trade while evading capture for extended periods. The legacy of these years was profound. Guzmán's methods had transformed the Sinaloa Cartel into a resilient, multi-state, and international organization. His ability to evade law enforcement, manage complex operations, and maintain internal loyalty created a model of organized crime that would influence other trafficking organizations. By 2014, El Chapo had become not only one of the most powerful traffickers in history but also a symbol of the challenges faced by governments in countering highly organized, adaptive criminal networks. In early 2014, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was apprehended in Mazatlan, Sinaloa, ending years of fugitive life and bringing what many believed would be the final chapter of his criminal career. However, his incarceration at Altiplano Federal Prison would prove temporary. Despite high security measures, Guzmán's escape in July 2015 demonstrated his extraordinary ability to exploit weaknesses in the system, plan meticulously, and coordinate complex operations even from behind bars. This period highlighted both his resilience and the challenges authorities faced in containing one of the world's most notorious criminals. The escape itself was audacious and unprecedented. Guzmán used a tunnel over 1.5 kilometers long, equipped with lighting, ventilation, and a modified motorcycle on rails, leading from his cell to a safe location outside the prison. The tunnel was so sophisticated that investigators concluded it required months of planning, extensive knowledge of the prison layout, and significant resources. The operation underscored Guzmán's ability to mobilize loyal operatives, coordinate construction under secrecy, and leverage corrupt contacts to facilitate an otherwise impossible escape. Following his escape, Guzmán disappeared into the shadows of northern Mexico. Law enforcement agencies, including Mexico's federal police and the DA, launched one of the largest manhunts in recent history. Helicopters, checkpoints, informants, and surveillance teams combed the regions known to harbor cartel operations. Despite these efforts, Guzmán proved remarkably elusive, leveraging his intimate knowledge of the terrain, loyal networks, and sophisticated counterintelligence to remain free. Analysts noted that his ability to vanish even under intense scrutiny was a testament to both his personal skill and the entrenched infrastructure of the Sinaloa Cartel. During this period, the Sinaloa Cartel maintained operations with minimal disruption. Guzmán's lieutenants and regional commanders managed day-to-day trafficking, distribution, and enforcement, allowing him to remain largely insulated while continuing to influence strategic decisions. His escape did not signal operational chaos. Instead, it highlighted the cartel's resilience and the effectiveness of the decentralized management structure he had implemented over the preceding decade. The network's ability to function efficiently without direct oversight underscored Guzmán's long-term strategic planning. Violence across Mexico intensified following Guzmán's escape. Rival cartels, including the Juarez and Tijuana factions, sought to exploit perceived vulnerabilities, while Sinaloa enforcers engaged in preemptive strikes to maintain dominance over critical territories. Analysts emphasize that Guzmán's strategy remained consistent, targeted, selective violence designed to intimidate rivals, enforce internal discipline, and protect smuggling corridors. These actions minimized widespread public exposure while ensuring operational stability. The period highlighted his skill in balancing the use of force with strategic restraint, further cementing his reputation as a master tactician. Financial operations continued to evolve. Guzmán's network relied on shell companies, real estate holdings, and international banking channels to move money while obscuring illicit origins. The use of couriers, encrypted communications, and offshore accounts allowed the cartel to maintain liquidity and fund operations despite the increased scrutiny following his escape. These methods not only safeguarded assets but also reinforced loyalty among key operatives, who were directly invested in the continued success and profitability of the Sinaloa Cartel. International pressure on Mexico intensified after the escape. U.S. authorities, concerned with the cartel's expansive trafficking network, coordinated with Mexican officials to track and capture Guzmán. Alerts were issued across borders, and the DEA increased intelligence sharing efforts, targeting known associates, safe houses, and smuggling routes. Despite these coordinated efforts, Guzmán's operational security, loyal network, and careful movement allowed him to evade capture for months, reinforcing the perception of him as virtually untouchable. In addition to evading law enforcement, Guzmán focused on consolidating the cartel's territorial dominance. Control over northern Mexican states was critical for smuggling into key U.S. markets, including Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston. Tactical alliances with smaller factions were reinforced, and rival territories were secured either through negotiation or selective enforcement actions. Analysts note that these measures allowed the Sinaloa Cartel to expand despite heightened law enforcement attention and the temporary absence of its leader from public operations. By early 2016, authorities had narrowed Guzmán's location to areas in northern Mexico, but each attempt at apprehension was met with careful evasion. Reports indicate that Guzmán employed decoys, misdirection, and coordinated communication among operatives to avoid detection. The scale of resources he mobilized for protection and operational continuity was unprecedented, demonstrating not only his wealth but also his logistical expertise and leadership acumen. Analysts have consistently highlighted that this period of evasion showcased Guzmán's ability to maintain operational command under extreme pressure. Guzmán's eventual recapture in January 2016 in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, marked a pivotal moment in his criminal career. Authorities stormed a safe house after intelligence indicated his presence, ending months of speculation and pursuit. Unlike prior arrests, this operation reflected improvements in law enforcement coordination, intelligence collection, and interagency cooperation, highlighting the increasing capabilities of Mexican authorities and U.S. partners. Guzmán was subsequently transferred to Altiplano Federal Prison, under even stricter security measures, including isolation and enhanced monitoring, reflecting lessons learned from his prior escape. The period between his 2015 escape and 2016 recapture had significant implications for the Sinaloa Cartel. While Guzmán remained influential, the pressure on the organization increased as law enforcement cracked down on operatives, safe houses, and distribution networks. Despite these challenges, the cartel maintained its dominance due to the operational structures Guzmán had implemented over the previous 2 decades. The ability of regional commanders to manage operations with minimal interference highlighted the effectiveness of his decentralized model and the sustainability of his criminal enterprise. Guzmán's legend, both locally and internationally, was further amplified by these events. Media coverage emphasized the audacity of his escapes, his continued evasion, and the scale of the Sinaloa Cartel's operations. Public fascination with El Chapo grew, feeding a narrative of an almost mythical figure in organized crime. This notoriety had practical implications. While it increased scrutiny from authorities, it also reinforced his ability to intimidate rivals and maintain loyalty among operatives, who remained aligned with a leader capable of extraordinary feats. By the end of 2016, Guzmán's recapture signaled the decline of his active operational control but did not erase the decades-long impact he had on the global drug trade. His methods, strategic planning, logistical sophistication, intelligence networks, financial operations, and selective violence continued to influence cartel operations. The events of 2014 to 2016 highlighted both the limitations of state enforcement in the face of highly adaptive criminal networks and the extraordinary capabilities of Guzmán as a criminal strategist. This period underscored the duality of Guzmán's career. While his escapes and evasions demonstrated audacity and genius in criminal strategy, they also exposed the structural vulnerabilities of the Sinaloa Cartel and the increasing reach of law enforcement. By 2016, authorities had adapted to his methods, reflecting a turning point in the ongoing struggle between organized crime and state power. Guzmán's capture marked not only the end of a fugitive era but also the beginning of a period in which his influence would be constrained, ultimately leading toward international prosecution. Following his recapture in January 2016, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán faced a new phase of his life: extradition to the United States. Mexican authorities, under immense pressure from U.S. agencies and international partners, quickly began proceedings to transfer him across the border. Guzmán's notoriety and the scale of his criminal operations meant that his extradition required careful planning, extensive security measures, and unprecedented coordination between Mexican and U.S. law enforcement. In early 2017, Guzmán was formally extradited to the United States. He was flown under heavy security from Mexico to New York, marking a historic moment in the fight against international drug trafficking. The transfer was emblematic of decades-long cooperation between the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and Mexican authorities. For Guzmán, this transition represented a turning point. While he had evaded capture for decades within Mexico, the U.S. legal system offered little opportunity for negotiation or leniency. Upon arrival, Guzmán faced charges including drug trafficking, money laundering, firearms offenses, and involvement in organized crime. The indictment, spanning multiple decades and detailing operations from Sinaloa to the United States, reflected the breadth of his influence. Prosecutors emphasized the massive scale of his criminal enterprise, noting the distribution of thousands of kilograms of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine across the U.S., and the immense profits generated by his operations. The legal case highlighted Guzmán's role not merely as a trafficker but as a strategic leader who orchestrated an international criminal network. The trial preparations revealed the extensive intelligence and investigative work conducted by U.S. authorities. Investigators relied on wiretaps, informants, undercover operations, and financial tracking to document the structure and scope of the Sinaloa Cartel. Testimonies from former associates, law enforcement officials, and victims of cartel violence painted a comprehensive picture of Guzmán's operational methods, decision-making, and influence. Analysts observed that the case represented one of the most detailed examinations of a criminal organization in U.S. judicial history, shedding light on the inner workings of one of the world's most powerful cartels. Throughout the trial, Guzmán maintained a high-profile presence. His history of escapes, audacious tactics, and media notoriety drew significant public attention. Courtroom proceedings were heavily secured, reflecting concerns over potential threats from cartel operatives or external actors seeking to influence outcomes. The trial also highlighted the complexities of prosecuting international organized crime figures. Evidence spanned continents, and multiple jurisdictions were involved in documenting Guzmán's activities, financial flows, and criminal associations. The proceedings emphasized the Sinaloa Cartel's sophisticated operations. Guzmán's leadership involved delegating regional managers, coordinating shipments, enforcing internal discipline, and overseeing financial networks. Prosecutors detailed the use of tunnels, semi-submersible vessels, aircraft, and hidden compartments to smuggle narcotics into the U.S. They highlighted his methods for laundering millions of dollars through businesses, real estate, and offshore accounts. Guzmán's strategic use of violence was also scrutinized, showing how targeted killings and intimidation secured compliance and deterred rivals while minimizing exposure to law enforcement. One of the most significant aspects of the trial was the testimony of former cartel associates. Several high-ranking members of the Sinaloa network cooperated with prosecutors, providing first-hand accounts of Guzmán's operational decisions, strategic thinking, and control mechanisms. These testimonies demonstrated the depth of his involvement, confirming that he maintained centralized oversight while empowering trusted lieutenants to manage specific territories or functions. Analysts noted that this combination of delegation and control was key to the cartel's resilience, allowing it to function effectively despite Guzmán's imprisonment, fugitive status, or temporary absence. Guzmán's defense attempted to portray him as a figurehead rather than a hands-on operator. Attorneys argued that his organizational structure meant he was not directly responsible for every action undertaken by associates. However, prosecutors countered with detailed evidence showing that Guzmán's directives directly influenced trafficking operations, enforcement actions, and financial transactions. The court ultimately accepted the argument that Guzmán's leadership role constituted active and continuous participation in the criminal enterprise. In February 2019, after several months of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on multiple counts, including engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, drug trafficking, money laundering, and firearms violations. The decision marked the culmination of decades of law enforcement efforts to dismantle the Sinaloa Cartel's leadership and hold Guzmán accountable for his role in the global drug trade. The verdict carried a sentence of life imprisonment plus an additional 30 years, effectively ensuring that Guzmán would spend the remainder of his life in U.S. custody. The trial also highlighted the broader impact of Guzmán's operations on Mexico and the United States. Authorities documented thousands of deaths resulting from cartel violence, corruption of officials, and social disruption in communities affected by the trafficking of narcotics. Guzmán's control over political figures, law enforcement, and economic channels demonstrated the systemic challenges posed by powerful criminal organizations. Analysts have noted that the case provided invaluable insights into the interplay between organized crime, governance, and transnational law enforcement. Following the sentencing, Guzmán was transferred to the U.S. Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX, in Florence, Colorado, widely regarded as the most secure prison in the United States. The facility is designed to prevent escape, minimize external communication, and restrict access to other inmates. Guzmán's incarceration marked a stark contrast to the decades of mobility, influence, and operational control he had maintained in Mexico. At ADX Florence, he was confined to a 7 by 12-foot cell for 23 hours a day, with limited interaction with staff or other prisoners, effectively neutralizing his capacity to influence the Sinaloa Cartel directly. While Guzmán's direct operational influence was curtailed, the Sinaloa Cartel continued to operate under the leadership of remaining lieutenants and family members. Analysts have noted that the organizational structure he developed, decentralized but strategically coordinated, allowed the cartel to maintain control over trafficking corridors, financial operations, and regional dominance even without his active presence. This resilience demonstrated the effectiveness of Guzmán's long-term strategic planning and the systemic challenges in dismantling entrenched criminal networks. Guzmán's trial and imprisonment also had significant symbolic value. For U.S. and Mexican authorities, the successful extradition and conviction represented a milestone in international cooperation and the enforcement of transnational law. The case served as a warning to other traffickers, illustrating that even the most elusive and powerful figures could eventually be brought to justice. For the public, media coverage reinforced the global notoriety of Guzmán, cementing his status as one of the most infamous drug lords in history while highlighting the human cost of his criminal enterprise. By the close of 2019, Guzmán had transitioned from fugitive to imprisoned figurehead, with his personal legend intact but his capacity to directly orchestrate cartel operations effectively ended. His incarceration represented both a law enforcement victory and a challenge. While he was neutralized, the networks and structures he created continued to function, adapting to new leadership, while maintaining the cartel's position in the global drug trade. The period from 2016 to 2019 thus represents the final phase of Guzmán's operational career, transitioning into accountability under the U.S. judicial system and the curtailment of his direct influence over organized crime. Following his conviction and transfer to ADX Florence in 2019, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán entered the final chapter of his criminal life under maximum security confinement. Confined to a 7 by 12-foot cell for 23 hours a day, Guzmán's capacity to influence the Sinaloa Cartel directly was effectively eliminated. Communication with the outside world was tightly controlled, with monitoring of correspondence and visits. Despite this, his name and legacy continued to shape organized crime, law enforcement strategies, and public perception of the drug trade, both in Mexico and globally. While Guzmán could no longer oversee operations personally, the Sinaloa Cartel remained resilient. Analysts note that the cartel's decentralized structure, which he meticulously built over decades, allowed it to maintain control over trafficking corridors, regional enforcement, and financial networks. Key lieutenants, including Ismael El Mayo Zambada, assumed operational leadership, ensuring that shipments, money laundering, and internal discipline continued with minimal disruption. Guzmán's careful succession planning and reliance on loyal commanders allowed the cartel to adapt, survive law enforcement pressure, and remain the dominant force in Mexico's drug trade. The period following Guzmán's imprisonment also saw shifts in cartel dynamics across Mexico. Rival organizations, including the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and remnants of the Gulf and Tijuana cartels, attempted to challenge Sinaloa's supremacy, leading to localized conflicts and territorial disputes. Analysts point out that while these confrontations resulted in episodic spikes in violence, the Sinaloa cartel's entrenched infrastructure, intelligence network, and ability to negotiate with both local authorities and other criminal organizations allowed it to retain a significant degree of operational continuity. Internationally, Guzmán's trial and incarceration reinforced the perception of Mexico and the U.S. as increasingly capable of countering high-level organized crime figures. The extradition process, lengthy trial, and life sentence demonstrated the effectiveness of bilateral cooperation, legal coordination, and intelligence sharing. These measures were hailed as a model for addressing transnational criminal networks, emphasizing the importance of cross-border collaboration, forensic accounting, surveillance, and infiltration of criminal operations. The legal process also provided invaluable intelligence on the inner workings of the Sinaloa Cartel, which continues to inform law enforcement strategies today. The cultural and symbolic impact of Guzmán persisted even after his imprisonment. Media portrayals, books, and documentaries have maintained public fascination with his life, escape attempts, and strategic acumen. While these narratives often glamorize elements of his criminal career, they also underscore the complex interplay between public perception, media, and criminal notoriety. Guzmán's story serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating both the extreme reach of organized crime and the societal costs of illicit economies, corruption, and violence. Financially, the Sinaloa Cartel continued to innovate in the post-Guzmán era. The organization diversified into synthetic drugs, including methamphetamine and fentanyl, adapting to market demands and enforcement pressures. Money laundering operations leveraged new technologies, cryptocurrencies, and international banking channels to obscure the origin of illicit funds. Analysts note that Guzmán's earlier financial strategies, such as layering transactions through shell companies, real estate, and international networks, laid the groundwork for these contemporary methods, highlighting the enduring influence of his operational vision. Despite his incarceration, Guzmán remained a figure of interest for both law enforcement and intelligence communities. Investigations into cartel operations, asset recovery, and global trafficking networks continued, informed by insights gleaned from Guzmán's trial, intercepted communications, and testimony from associates. These investigations not only targeted financial flows and operational hierarchies but also monitored emerging threats, potential successors, and the evolution of smuggling methods, illustrating how the shadow of Guzmán continues to shape law enforcement priorities. The social impact of Guzmán's career remains profound. Communities in Sinaloa and other parts of Mexico continue to feel the effects of decades-long cartel operations, including violence, economic disruption, and the corruption of local institutions. At the same time, some neighborhoods benefited from early philanthropic gestures associated with his rise, though these interventions were inseparable from the broader context of criminal control and coercion. Sociologists and criminologists continue to study this duality, examining how figures like Guzmán can simultaneously inspire loyalty and perpetuate fear within communities. Global drug markets continue to reflect the structures Guzmán helped establish. U.S. consumption of cocaine, methamphetamine, and increasingly synthetic opiates remains intertwined with supply chains controlled or influenced by the Sinaloa Cartel. Analysts emphasize that while Guzmán himself no longer orchestrates operations, the systems he built persist, demonstrating the long-term impact of centralized leadership combined with decentralized operational management. Law enforcement agencies must continually adapt to evolving smuggling techniques, shifting alliances, and financial innovations, highlighting the enduring complexity of combating such organizations. Guzmán's incarceration has also influenced legal and correctional strategies. ADX Florence's measures, including isolation, restricted communication, and continuous surveillance, represent a case study in containing high-profile criminals who previously demonstrated an exceptional ability to evade capture. Guzmán's life sentence has become a reference point for dealing with organized crime leaders, providing insight into both the logistical and psychological components of maximum security imprisonment. Authorities globally study his incarceration to inform strategies for neutralizing the influence of similarly powerful criminal figures. Public and governmental discourse on drug policy, cartel violence, and transnational crime has been shaped by Guzmán's career. Policymakers reference the Sinaloa Cartel and Guzmán's methods when debating border security, drug legalization, and international collaboration. Analysts argue that his legacy underscores the limitations of enforcement-focused approaches, highlighting the need for multifaceted strategies addressing demand reduction, financial disruption, and social interventions. Guzmán's story continues to inform these debates, illustrating both the challenges and potential strategies for reducing the power of transnational criminal organizations. By the early 2020s, Guzmán's influence was largely symbolic, but the systems he established endured. Sinaloa cartel operations remained robust, maintaining trafficking routes into the US, Europe, and other international markets. Regional commanders continued to enforce territorial control, manage logistics, and ensure financial flow, demonstrating the effectiveness of the organizational model Guzmán had perfected over decades. Analysts note that this continuity underscores the challenges of dismantling such a deeply embedded and adaptive network. Guzmán's life and criminal career, now fully contained within the prison system, also serve as a cautionary framework for emerging traffickers. His methods, strategic coordination, logistical innovation, intelligence networks, and selective violence, continue to be studied by both law enforcement and criminal organizations alike. While his personal freedom is gone, his operational legacy offers lessons in leadership, risk management, and organizational resilience that resonate far beyond the borders of Mexico. Even in incarceration, the shadow of El Chapo remains. Law enforcement agencies continue to monitor communications, financial activities, and cartel leadership structures to anticipate potential disruptions, rivalries, and operational risks. Guzmán's life demonstrates the enduring interplay between personal ambition, organizational strategy, and systemic vulnerabilities in both criminal and law enforcement spheres. His story, from a small-town smuggler to a globally notorious cartel leader, remains a defining chapter in the history of organized crime. The global impact of Guzmán's career is undeniable. He influenced patterns of drug trafficking, cartel organization, and law enforcement cooperation across multiple continents. The systems he built, the alliances he formed, and the operational innovations he introduced continue to shape the global narcotics trade. While Guzmán himself will spend the remainder of his life behind bars, the Sinaloa Cartel remains a formidable presence, a testament to the enduring structures he created and the challenges faced by authorities combating transnational criminal organizations.